At exactly 7:42 on the morning of March 14, 1941, the cold air over RAF Kenley carried the sound of a Merlin engine coughing to life. A thin layer of frost still clung to the edges of the runway. Ground crew moved quickly, their breath visible in the early light, boots scraping against the hardened tarmac as another hurricane was prepared for takeoff. Standing just off the dispersal pad, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, Beatrice Shilling watched in silence. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. At 32 years old, she was a principal technical officer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough, one of the very few women in Britain working at that level in aeronautical engineering, but titles didn't matter out here on the edge of war. Only one thing mattered. Did your idea keep pilots alive? And right now, hers had not yet. Across the field, a young pilot climbed into his Hurricane. Squadron leader Davies, 24 years old, 40 combat missions, 3 confirmed kills, and twice in the last month, he had nearly died, not because of enemy fire, not because of a mistake, but because his engine had simply stopped. Shilling had read his reports. She had memorized them, every word, every detail, because his story wasn't unique. It was a pattern, a deadly repeating pattern that was slowly bleeding the Royal Air Force dry. The numbers told the truth no one wanted to say out loud. In the past week alone, the Luftwaffe had sent 43 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters across the English Channel. RAF pilots had intercepted them in 27 separate engagements. The result? 14 Hurricanes destroyed, 9 Spitfires lost, dozens of pilots dead or missing, but the most terrifying part was how predictable it had become. It always started the same way. A British pilot would spot a German fighter at altitude. Adrenaline surged. Training kicked in. He would push the nose of his aircraft down into a steep dive, trying to gain speed and position for the attack. For a brief moment, everything worked perfectly. The aircraft accelerated. The target grew larger in his sights. His finger tightened on the trigger and then the engine died. No warning, no sputtering, no gradual failure, just silence, complete and absolute. At 300 miles per hour, inside the cockpit, the world would flip instantly from control to chaos. The pilot would feel the sudden loss of power as the aircraft lurched forward into a powerless dive. His stomach would rise against his chest as negative G forces pressed him against his harness. His hands would move instinctively, fuel mixture, throttle, ignition, anything to bring the engine back to life. But for 1.5 seconds, nothing worked. And in aerial combat, 1.5 seconds was everything. That tiny window of time was enough. Enough for the German pilot ahead to react, enough to break formation, or worse, enough to roll, turn, and come back around, because unlike the British aircraft, German didn't lose power in a dive. Their Daimler-Benz engines used direct fuel injection. No float chamber, no flooding, no hesitation. They could dive, roll, invert, and climb without losing a single beat of engine performance. Which meant one thing. They controlled the fight. German pilots had learned this quickly, and they used it without mercy. They would bait British fighters into diving attacks. They would wait for the engine to fill, then they would turn back and fire. Shilling had seen the aftermath. Reports written in cold clinical language: engine failure during dive. Aircraft lost during engagement. Pilot failed to recover. But she knew what those words really meant. They meant a young man barely trained, barely experienced, had been thrown into a fight where his own machine betrayed him. She had interviewed the survivors, the lucky ones, pilots who had managed to restart their engines just in time. Pilots who had escaped with their lives by instinct, training, or pure chance. They all described the same moment, the same terror, the same helplessness. It just stopped. One pilot had told her, no warning, no noise, nothing. Another had said, you go from hunter to target in a second. You feel it, you know it. And there's nothing you can do. Shilling carried those words with her. They weren't just reports, they were feelings, because she understood the problem better than anyone. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the heart of both the Hurricane and the Spitfire, used a float-type carburetor. It was a brilliant piece of engineering under normal conditions. Simple, reliable, efficient, but it had one fatal weakness: gravity. Under positive G forces, climbing, level flight, normal maneuvering, the carburetor worked perfectly. Fuel settled where it was supposed to. Flow remained stable. The engine ran smoothly. But under negative G, everything changed. When a pilot pushed the aircraft into a sudden dive, gravity effectively reversed. Inside, the float chamber surged upward. Instead of feeding smoothly into the engine, it flooded the system. Too much fuel, wrong direction, incorrect pressure. The engine choked, and then it died, not permanently, not catastrophically, but just long enough to kill a pilot. 1.5 seconds, that number haunted her. She had calculated it dozens of times, measured it in test conditions, verified it through combat reports. 1.5 seconds of fuel starvation, 1.5 seconds of lost power, 1.5 seconds of vulnerability, and in that time, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 could close the distance by nearly 300 yards, enough to turn a missed opportunity into a confirmed kill. Back on the tarmac, Shilling shifted her weight slightly, eyes fixed on Davies' aircraft as ground crew finished their checks. She could hear the Merlin engine idling now. Smooth, perfect, at least for the moment. That was the cruelest part. The engine worked flawlessly until it didn't. For 11 months, she had worked up the problem. 11 months of calculations, experiments, failures. At Farnborough, entire engineering teams were trying to design a permanent solution, a pressure carburetor, a complete redesign of the fuel delivery system. something that would eliminate the problem entirely. But that solution was years away, 1943, maybe 1944. The war wouldn't wait that long, and neither would the pilots. Every single morning, young men like Davies climbed into their aircraft knowing something terrifying. Their greatest threat might not be the enemy. It might be their own engine. Davies closed the cockpit canopy. The latch clicked into place. He adjusted his gloves, ran through his final check. Shilling watched him carefully. He didn't know she was here, didn't know who she was. To him, she was just another figure on the edge of the airfield. Maybe a clerk, maybe a secretary. He had no idea. That she might be the only reason he survived the day, or the reason he didn't. The engine roared louder. Aircraft began to roll forward, slow at first, then faster. Shilling felt her heart rate increase, not from fear, from calculation, fuel flow rate, air pressure, carburetor behavior under load, negative G direction. She had run the numbers 100 times. They all pointed to the same conclusion. The problem wasn't too little fuel, it was too much at the wrong moment. And if that was true, then maybe, just maybe, the solution wasn't complicated at all. Maybe it was something simple, something small, something almost insignificant. Her eyes drifted toward the leather satchel resting beside her. Inside it, wrapped carefully in cloth, were 6 small brass components, unapproved, untested, in combat and potentially career-ending or war-changing. The Hurricane lifted off the ground, climbing steadily into the pale morning sky. Shilling watched it rise higher and higher until it became just a dark shape against the clouds, and as it disappeared into the distance, she made a decision. By noon that day, she would either prove her idea worked, or she would lose everything. The Hurricane had disappeared into the morning sky. For a few seconds, Beatrice Shilling kept staring at the empty horizon, as if her eyes could somehow follow the aircraft beyond sight, beyond distance, into combat itself. Reality pulled her back. Out there over the channel, things were already happening. Violent, unforgiving, she turned slightly and walked back toward the edge of the dispersal area. Engines roared in the distance. Ground crew shouted instructions. Fuel trucks rumbled past. To everyone else, it was just another morning at war, but for Shilling, this wasn't routine. This was a countdown. Because she understood something most people didn't. The RAF wasn't just losing aircraft, it was losing control of the fight. And the reason wasn't courage. British pilots were among the best in the world, highly trained, disciplined, aggressive when needed, but even the best pilot in the sky is powerless when his engine dies. Shilling had spent months analyzing combat patterns, not just individual reports, but the bigger picture. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. German pilots weren't just better equipped, they were fighting a completely different kind of battle. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 wasn't dramatically faster than a Spitfire. It wasn't massively more maneuverable than a Hurricane. On paper, the aircraft were evenly matched, but combat wasn't fought on paper. It was fought in seconds, moments, decisions, and in those moments, German pilots had one critical advantage. Their engines didn't fail. While British aircraft relied on float-type carburetors, the Germans used direct fuel injection systems. Sounds like a small difference, technical, almost insignificant. Combat, it changed everything. With direct fuel injection, fuel was delivered under pressure directly into the engine. It didn't rely on gravity. It didn't depend on fuel sitting in chamber. It didn't care about the orientation of the aircraft. Dive straight down, no button, fly upside down, still running. Pull aggressive negative G maneuvers, full power. The engine never missed a beat. That meant German pilots could do something British pilots couldn't. They could control the fight vertically. They could dive whenever they wanted, attack from above, disengage instantly, reposition without fear. And worst of all, they could exploit the weakness of their enemy. Shilling had read translated Luftwaffe after-action reports. At first they were subtle, observational. Enemy aircraft loses power in steep dive. British fighters break off attack premature as weeks pass. The tone changed. German pilots weren't just noticing the weakness, they were using it deliberately. They would allow RAF fighters to gain altitude advantage. They would appear vulnerable, even exposed. And then they would wait, because they knew what would happen next. The British pilot would commit to the attack, push into a dive, accelerate, close distance, and right at the critical moment his engine would fail. That was the moment the German pilot had been waiting for. He would roll, turn, time, and suddenly the hunter became the hunted. Shilling clenched her jaw slightly as she remembered one particular report. A pilot named Fletcher, 19 years old. On his second combat mission, he had spotted a lone Messerschmitt below him. Perfect position, textbook attack. He dove. Everything going exactly as trained, and then engine failure. By the time he got the Merlin restarted, the German fighter was already behind him. He never made it back. Shilling closed her eyes briefly. She had read that report 3 times, not because she needed to, but because she couldn't stop thinking about it. This wasn't just a technical flaw, it was a tactical disaster. Because it meant the RAF couldn't fully use its aircraft. Pilots were forced to fight defensively. Hesitantly, they avoided steep dives, avoided aggressive maneuvers, avoided the very tactics that could win them the fight. And in doing so, they handed control to the enemy. Back at Farnborough, the engineering teams knew all of this. They weren't blind to the problem. Rolls-Royce had already begun working on a solution, a pressure carburetor. It would eliminate the float chamber entirely, replace it with a pressurized fuel delivery system. Similar in principle to German injection engines. On paper, it was perfect. In reality, it was too slow. Designing it would take months. Testing would take longer. Production even more. Best case scenario. Late 1943. Shilling didn't need to calculate that. She already knew what it meant. By the time the solution arrived, hundreds more pilots would be dead, maybe more. That was unacceptable. She wasn't the kind of engineer who could sit back and wait for the perfect solution, not when a temporary one might save lives. Now, even if it was elegant, even if it wasn't permanent, even if it wasn't approved, she believed in something simpler. A working solution was better than a perfect one that came too late. Her mind drifted back to January, the moment everything changed. She had been staring at test data for hours, fuel flow rates, pressure variations, carburetor response curves, nothing useful, just numbers, until she stopped looking at the system as a whole and started focusing on one question: what exactly causes the engine to fail? Not in theory, not in design, but in that exact moment. Negative G fuel surge flooding. Too much fuel. That was it. Not too little, too much. The engine wasn't starving, it was choking. That realization had been unsettling because it meant the solution might not be complicated at all. It might be ridiculously simple. What if you didn't redesign the system? What if you didn't replace the carburetor? What if you just controlled the fuel? Limited, not completely enough to stop flooding, but still allow proper flow under normal conditions. The idea felt almost too simple, but simple didn't mean wrong. It meant fast, and fast was exactly what the RAF needed. Shilling opened her eyes and looked again at the empty sky. Somewhere out there, Davies was flying, maybe already in combat, maybe already diving, and if he did, his engine would fail, unless she changed something right now. Her gaze shifted again to the leather satchel beside her. Inside it, wrapped carefully, was the result of weeks of quiet, obsessive work. Not a new carburetor, not a redesign, not a complex system, just a small piece of precise measure, tested and completely unofficial. She knew what installing it would mean: breaking regulations, ignoring protocol, risking everything she had worked for. If it failed, if even one pilot died because of it, her career would be over. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst consequence, but if she did nothing, pilots would continue to die anyway. That was the equation: risk everything or watch the numbers keep rising. The wind shifted slightly across the airfield. A distant radio crackled. Ground crew continued their work. Time moved forward, and Shilling realized something with absolute clarity. No one else was going to fix this day. No committee, no department, no official approval, just her. And what she chose to do next: she picked up the satchel slowly, held it in her hands for a moment, feeling its weight. It didn't feel like much, but inside it was the difference between life and death. She turned toward the line of parked Hurricanes, toward the ground crews, toward the place where decisions became actions, and as she started walking, there was no hesitation left. By the end of this day, she would either prove her idea worked in real combat conditions, or she would prove that she had been wrong. There was no middle ground. Once she made the decision, there was no hesitation left. The morning air cut across the tarmac as she moved toward the maintenance area, her boots striking a steady rhythm against the ground. Around her, RAF Kenley was alive with activity engines warming, tools clanking, voices shouting over mechanical noise. But for Shilling, everything had narrowed to a single objective: test it now. She spotted him near the edge of the dispersal pad, Sergeant William Cooper, a senior ground crew mechanic, sleeves rolled, hands blackened with oil, standing beside an open Merlin engine panel. He looked up as she approached. For a moment there was recognition, then curiosity, then something else: understanding. Cooper had been working on Merlin engines for years. He had seen things, too many things. Engines that failed without warning, aircraft that didn't return, pilots who never climbed out of their cockpits again. Shilling didn't waste time. She opened the satchel, carefully unwrapped the cloth, and revealed the small brass piece inside. It didn't look like much, just a flat washer, perfectly machined, a tiny hole in the center. Cooper stared at her. "What is it?" he asked. Shilling's voice was calm, precise. "Controlled, a fuel restrictor," she said. "It limits flow to prevent carburetor flooding under negative G." Cooper didn't respond immediately. He looked back at the washer, then at the Hurricane beside him, then back at Shilling. "Will it work?" he asked. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, then she answered yes. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't guesswork. It was certainly built from weeks of testing, calculation, and understanding. Cooper nodded slowly. That was enough for him. He didn't ask about authorization, didn't ask about paperwork, didn't ask about consequences. He had seen 19 pilots die from engine-related failures. If there was even a chance this could stop that, it was worth it. "Which aircraft?" he asked lightly, her eyes locking onto a familiar Hurricane, Davies' aircraft. The same pilot she had been watching earlier. The same pilot who had nearly died twice already. "That one," she said. Cooper didn't hesitate. He grabbed his toolkit, gestured toward the aircraft. "Let's make it quick." The Hurricane sat ready on the dispersal pad, engine ticking softly as it cooled between checks. Ground crew moved around it, unaware that something very unusual was about to happen. Her climbed onto the wing, opened the engine panel, exposed the heart of the machine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, 12 cylinders, liquid-cooled, one of the most advanced engines of its time, and right now, a fatal flaw waiting to be corrected. Shilling stepped closer, her eyes scanning every component, every connection, every line. "This section," she said, pointing precisely, "between the fuel pump and the carburetor." Cooper nodded. Already reaching for the tools, he disconnected the fuel line carefully. Fuel dripped slightly. The smell of aviation gas filled the air. Time mattered now. The pilot could return at any moment. An officer could walk by. Someone could ask questions, and questions would stop everything. Shilling held the brass restrictor in her hand for a moment, looking at it not as an object, but as a decision. If this failed, there would be no hiding it. A dead pilot, an unauthorized modification, a clear chain of responsibility. Her career would be over instantly, possibly worse. But if it worked, she didn't finish that thought, didn't need to. "Ready," Cooper said. Shilling handed him the restrictor. He slid it into place inside the fuel line. Perfect fit, exactly as designed. Now came the critical part, securing it. Cooper picked up a small butane torch, lit. A soft blue flame flickered life. He worked with carefully. The metal heated, edges fused, connection sealed. 30 seconds, 40-60 done. He turned off the torch, let the metal cool, then checked the joint with practiced precision. Held, no gaps, no weakness. Shilling leaned in slowly, examining it herself. Perfect. If it failed now, it wouldn't be because of the installation. Cooper reconnected the fuel line, tightened the fittings, ran a quick pressure check. No leaks from the outside. Nothing had changed. The aircraft looked exactly the same. Everything was different. Shilling stepped back, heart beating faster now, not from fear, from anticipation. Because now, there was no turning back. Footsteps approached Days. He walked toward the aircraft, helmet under his arm, gloves in hand. Focus calm. Unaware, he climbed onto the wing, slid into the cockpit. Shilling watched every movement. Every second felt sharper now, more tense. Davies ran through his pre-flight checks. Fuel on. Throttle set. Magnetos dash live. He pressed the starter. The Merlin engine roared to life. Shilling's breath caught slightly. This was it. If the restrictor was too small, the engine would start immediately. If it was too large, nothing would change. The problem would remain. The engine stabilized. Smooth, steady, no irregularities. Cooper glanced at Shilling, said nothing, but his expression said everything so far. Davies increased throttle. The engine responded instantly. Clean acceleration. Still normal. Still perfect. Shilling felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not yet. Hope. Davies completed his checks, signaled ready. Ground crew pulled the chocks away. The Hurricane began to roll, slow at first, then faster. The engine roared louder as it gained speed. Shilling's eyes never left the aircraft. This wasn't a test anymore. This was combat, real, uncontrolled, unpredictable. The Hurricane accelerated down the runway, and then lifted into the air, clean, smooth, no hesitation. Shilling followed it with her gaze as it climbed 800 feet, 1,200, 2,000. The aircraft banked slightly, turning south toward the channel, toward the enemy. Two more Hurricanes joined him, forming a section of three. Standard patrol formation. Within minutes, they were gone. Just empty sky again. Silence. Shilling lowered her eyes slowly. The installation had worked. The engine had started. The aircraft had taken off, but none of that mattered because the real test hadn't happened yet. The dive, -G, the moment where engines failed or didn't. She walked a few steps away, then stopped. There was nothing left to do. No adjustments, no corrections, no second chances. Just wait. Cooper stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They both understood exactly what was at stake. Somewhere over the channel, a pilot would make a decision. Or not, and in that moment a tiny piece of brass would decide his fate. Time slowed down, not literally, but for Beatrice Shilling it felt like the world had shifted into something heavy, thicker. Every second stretched, every moment lingered. The sky above RAF Kenley was now empty, just pale blue, streaked with thin clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Davies and his section were flying toward the channel, toward enemy territory, toward the exact conditions that had been killing RAF pilots for months. Shilling stood exactly where she had been since the Hurricane disappeared from sight. She hadn't moved much, had not spoken, hadn't even taken her eyes off the sky for long. Beside her, Sergeant Cooper shifted his weight slightly, arms folded across his chest. He glanced at her once, then back at the horizon. "You've done what you can," he muttered quietly. Shilling didn't respond because she knew that wasn't true. What she had done couldn't be undone. And now it wasn't in her hands anymore. It was in the hands of a pilot who didn't even know his aircraft had been changed. And in the laws of physics that didn't care about hope, intention, or consequences. Minutes passed. Airfield continued its routine around them. Engine started. Engine stopped. Ground crew moved equipment. Orders were shouted. War didn't pause for experiments, but Shilling felt completely disconnected from all of it. In her mind, there was only one moment that mattered. The dive. She replayed it again and again. Davies spotting an enemy aircraft, adjusting position, pushing the nose down, -G fuel surging upward. Except this time the restrictor was there, limiting the flow, preventing the flood, keeping the engine alive. That was the theory, that was the calculation, that was everything she had worked toward. But theory wasn't reality. Reality was violent, unpredictable, chaotic. And it only took one variable, one miscalculation, one tiny flaw to turn a solution into a disaster. 20 minutes passed, then 30, still no radio calls, no updates, no signs. Shilling finally lowered her gaze for a moment. Her hands were cold. She hadn't noticed before. She rubbed together slowly, not to warm them, but to steady them. Because now the doubt was starting to creep in, not loud, not overwhelming, just quiet questions. What if the restrictor was too small? What if it starved the engine at full power? What if under combat stress, something behaved differently than in tests? What if she stopped herself? Remember, she had done the calculations, tested every variable, measured every possibility, 17 different designs, 17 failures before one success. She hadn't guessed, she had known, and yet this wasn't a test bench in Farnborough. This was combat. An hour passed, still nothing. The silence began to feel heavier now, more meaningful. Radio silence could mean many things. No enemy contact, routine patrol, or something far worse. Aircraft lost before they could report. Pilots too busy fighting to transmit, or Shilling didn't finish that thought. She didn't need to. She had read enough reports to know how these missions ended. Cooper shift again, cleared his throat slightly. "They should have checked in by now," he said. Shilling nodded faintly. "Yes," she replied quietly. Her voice was calm, but her mind wasn't, because now the clock wasn't just measuring time, it was measuring outcomes. Every minute without contact increased the uncertainty. Every second stretched the tension tighter. Then a sound, faint at first, almost lost in the background noise of the airfield, but Unmistakable engines distant approaching. Shilling's head lifted instantly. Her eyes locked onto the sky. Cooper straightened beside her. They both heard it now. 3 engines, not 1, not 2, 3. Shilling raised her binoculars with slightly trembling hands, focused, adjusted, and then she saw them. 3 dark shapes against the sky. Formation intact, all aircraft still flying, all returning. For a moment she didn't breathe, because this alone was already unexpected. No losses, that almost never happened. The hurricanes grew larger. They approached, descending gradually, lining up for landing. Shilling followed the lead aircraft. Her heart was pounding now, but not from fear, from anticipation, because the real question still hadn't been answered. Did he dive? The first hurricane touchdown, smooth landing, wheels hitting the runway with controlled precision. The second followed, then third. All 3 aircraft rolled safely along the tarmac, aligned. Returning, Davies taxied toward the dispersal area, cut the engine, the propeller slowed, then stopped. Silence. For a moment, everything fell still. Then the canopy slid up and Davies climbed out, and something about him was immediately different. Shilling noticed it before he even spoke. He wasn't exhausted, wasn't shaken, wasn't tense. He was smiling. That alone was enough to make her pulse spike, because pilots didn't smile after combat, not usually, not after what they had been facing. Cooper stepped forward, first casual, professional. Any problems with the engine, sir? Davies pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through his hair, still smiling. Then he said something that made Shilling's entire body go still. Best the Merlin's ever run. Shilling felt the words hit her like a shockwave, but she didn't react immediately, because one statement wasn't enough. She needed details, proof. She stepped forward. August, what happened in the air? She asked, and Davies looked at her, slightly curious, but answered without hesitation. Spotted 2 Messerschmitts over the channel, he said. Had altitude advantage. Shilling's breathing slowed slightly. This was it, the moment. I pushed into a dive, he continued. Her heart skipped. Steep 1, close to 400 miles per hour. Negative G, exactly the condition, exactly the test. Davies shook his head slightly, almost in disbelief in the engine. He said, never cut out silence. For just a fraction of a second, everything seemed to stop, because in that moment, Shilling knew it worked. But Davies wasn't finished. I held full power the entire dive, he continued. Closed distance fast, got within 200 yards. Shilling's mind raced. That had never been possible before, never. Fire to burst, he said. Hit his wing, he broke off. Davies shrugged slightly. The rest of the patrol was routine. He said it like it was nothing, but Shilling understood what it meant. Something fundamental had changed. The fight, the balance, the outcome, all of it, because of something small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. Davies looked at Cooper, then back at Shilling. What did you do to my engine, he asked. And now there was no hiding it, no avoiding it, no pretending. Shilling met his gaze.
Helmet in one hand, listening carefully as Beatrice Shilling explained exactly what she had done to his aircraft.
No exaggeration, no dramatics, just facts. A restrictor, she said. Installed in the fuel line, it limits the flow under negative G to prevent flooding. Davies stared at her for a moment, not confused, not skeptical, thinking, because what she was describing made perfect sense. He had felt it up there, in the air. In the exact moment where his engine should have died, it didn't. He looked back toward his hurricane, then at Cooper, then back at Shilling. How many more do you have? He asked. Shilling hesitated for just a fraction of a second. 5, she said. Davies nodded immediately. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Put them in every aircraft you can, he said. Today, Shilling exhaled slowly, because this was the moment where everything could have gone differently. He could have refused, demanded authorization, reported her, but he didn't. Because he understood something more important than regulations. He understood survival. Within minutes, Cooper was already moving, tools in hand, heading toward the next hurricane. Words faster than expected. Pilots began asking questions. Ground crew gathered around. What is it? Does it work? Is it safe? Davies answered them himself. I just dove on 2 Messerschmitts at full power, he said. Engine didn't miss once. That was enough. No technical briefing, no official report. Just one sentence from a combat pilot. And suddenly everyone wanted it. By the end of the afternoon, 4 more hurricanes had been fitted. Each installation took less than 15 minutes. Disconnect, insert, seal, test, fast, effective. That night, 5 RAF pilots went to sleep knowing something had changed. The next morning, they proved it. Over the next 3 days, those modified aircraft flew multiple patrols, engaged enemy fighters, performed aggressive maneuvers, high-speed attacks. The exact conditions that used to cause engine failures. And the result? Failures. Not one engine cut out, not one pilot forced to disengage, not one moment of help. Silence at 300 miles per hour. The effect was immediate and undeniable. Pilots began pressing attacks harder, diving faster, fighting more aggressively, because now they could. One pilot described it simply, it feels like the aircraft finally belongs to me. That was the difference. Before, the restrictor pilots fought with limitations, with hesitation, with fear of their own machine. After it, they fought with confidence. By March 18th, every squadron commander in the area had heard about it. They didn't wait for official approval. They didn't ask for permission. They made requests immediate. How fast can we get these installed? How many can you produce? When can you come to our station? Shilling suddenly found herself at the center of something much bigger than an experiment. This wasn't just a fix anymore, this was a solution. The only problem was scale. She had made 6 restrictors by hand. 6. The RAF needed thousands immediately. She returned to Farn with data, real combat data, not theory, not simulation. Proof. The Air Ministry reviewed her findings, and for once the system moved fast. In just 4 days, approval was granted. Rolls-Royce was ordered to begin production, 500 units per week, then more, as fast as they could manufacture them. Shilling didn't wait. She assembled a small team, packed tools, loaded her motorcycle, and began traveling from one RAF station to another, personally overseeing installations, teaching ground crews, ensuring quality, because she knew something critical: an installation could kill just as easily as the original problem. At each station, the reaction was the same: skepticism at first, then curiosity, then belief, because pilots didn't trust words. They trusted results, and the results were undeniable. Within 2 weeks, hundreds of aircraft had been modified. Within a month, thousands, every operational Hurricane, every Spitfire and Fighter Command, all carrying a tiny piece of brass. Pilots gave it a name: unofficial, slightly rude, very British. Miss Shilling's office. Shilling didn't mind, because behind the humor was respect, and behind the respect was survival. German pilots noticed the change. At first, they couldn't explain it. British fighters were behaving differently, more aggressive, more persistent. They no longer broke off during dives. They no longer hesitated. They no longer gave up control of the fight. The advantage was gone. Just like that, combat statistics confirmed it. Before the restrictor, engine failures occurred in over a third of diving attacks. After it, almost none. The kill-to-loss ratio shifted, not dramatically overnight, but steadily climbing. The RAF was no longer fighting at a disadvantage. They were fighting on equal terms, and sometimes that was all it took. Shilling's restrictor wasn't the final solution. The pressure carburetor would come later, more advanced, more complete, but it didn't matter, because the RAF needed something immediately. She gave it to them. A solution that worked right now, under real conditions: a small brass washable, unremarkable, and absolutely game-changing. Years later, engineers would study it, not because it was complex, but because it wasn't. It was a perfect example of something rare. A solution that was simple, fast, effective, and life-saving. Beatrice Shilling never called herself a hero. She didn't think in those terms. She thought in problems, in systems, in solutions. But somewhere in the sky over the channel, every time a pilot pushed into a dive and his engine kept running, her work was there. Invisible, silent, saving lives. And sometimes that's what real heroism looks like. Not loud, not celebrated, just a small piece of brass, doing exactly what it was designed to do.